Hello, Stoned Apes and others who are curious about the healing powers of psychedelic medicines. Welcome to the Stoned Ape Reports. I'm your host, Stuart Preston. Each episode, I talk to another Stoned Ape, somebody who has experienced the transformational powers of psychedelics, or with a practitioner who works with these medicines. In this episode, I had the pleasure of speaking with Jasmin. She shared her thoughts on respect and reverence for entheogens, developing kinship with other people, feeling truth, and breaking the stigma of psychedelics in the African American community. Please enjoy this episode with Jasmin. So, Jasmin, thank you so much for joining me here on the Stoned Ape Reports. Why don't we start off by maybe you telling us what your quote Stoned Ape story is? You know, like maybe what brought you to entheogens, to psychedelics, plant medicines, whatever you prefer to call them, and how they helped you.
Sure. So I am 34. And the first time I tried a psychedelic was my first year in college. I believe I was 17 when I went away to school. So I had a few friends, a gentleman two friends that I knew from high school that went to the same university as me. And we ended up, they gave me chocolate. It was heart-shaped chocolate, and it was gross. But that night, we walked into the woods. I completely trusted the people I was with. So I was with four men, young men, and myself. So I was the only girl. And we went into the woods, and there was a big, giant boulder with a painting of a mushroom on it. And I guess this is what the space was generally used for. So someone marked it. And we sat on the top of that tall boulder and watched Lord of the Rings for 45 minutes, and then basically just traipsed around the woods, and then ended up going back to watch a movie. Now, that particular experience wasn't transformative for me. I didn't realize at the time that I have a pretty high tolerance. I don't know what to attribute that to. I was prescribed Adderall when I was younger. And I don't know if that means anything, but I did take, such a strong drug during my, early teenage years that, those things could have effects. I don't know that much into the science of that, but that particular experience was not, too intense. That was my first.
It doesn't sound like you went into it. Doesn't sound like you went into it with an intent to really solve something, right? And it's more of was that kind of a recreational type of experience? Not that that's bad, but is that more like what you guys were doing?
It was for me personally. To be honest with you, it was kind of a random evening. I thought that maybe we'd go, hang out, smoke pot. That's what you do. And they were like, "Oh, do you want to try?" And I thought, sure. Being that I went to high school with a couple of these people previously, I remember the first time I had heard of someone I knew taking a psychedelic was one of the people that I was with. And he made it sound like such an amazing experience that I was still shy about those things. And I put it out of my mind until I was hanging out with him, a couple of years later. And so, no, the first, actually several times I took mushrooms were, I wasn't aware of the respect and reverence that one should have when going into, using an entheogen. So it was more like a playtime, if you will.
Okay. Yeah.
And basically yes.
No, I was going to say, so what happened when you did have that kind of transformational experience?
So that was actually LSD. The first time I tried LSD was 3 years later. When I was 21, I had moved out of my mother's house, and we had decorated for a Halloween party. So we actually covered our ceilings, floors, and walls in black. And so I tripped for the first time in a room decorated with black lights. And so that experience kind of it propels you out of your normalcy. You're not just in your bedroom or in someone's house. You're in a different land. And so it visually it was stunning, but emotionally it was shaken, or I was shaken because I try to explain it. I have emotions, of course, as a regular person, but sometimes I lack the ability to connect. I'm good. I would see myself as better at people than with people. I'm
I see.
extroverted introvert to where I love
Yeah.
socializing, but sometimes I don't allow people to really see me or to connect in that way of friendship, of just kinship.
Right.
And so that was an amazing experience with the two friends that I was with, because I felt that I connected with them in such a way that I had never really felt before. I was so emotionally involved in these people in this time that we were together, and that was that was that was quite the experience. And so then I ended up doing LSD several times, and one thing that it did was transform how I felt about just trusting my eyes, trusting what I see instead of what I know. I can be very clinical with the way I look at things. This is that. This is that. I believe what I see. I'm a skeptic in that. I can be a skeptic in that way. So this was more. I knew that I described it as my eyes were lying to me, but I could feel the truth. And
Right.
I genuinely describe the experiences more with mushrooms as saying you could write a list of 10 things that you are thinking about, 10 things that are on your mind, and somehow, on these particular psychedelics, you're able to solve a lot of your problems instantly. It's like you could say, I'm moving, and maybe you felt, things are very busy, or I don't know how I feel about it, and you take a psychedelic and you look at that sentence, I'm moving, and you really know how you feel about it. Once you think about that thing that maybe you were suppressing or you just weren't dealing with, you weren't sure how you really felt about it until you tapped into that part of yourself that psychedelics allowed me to tap into.
When you tapped into that, what kind of things did you discover or did you see, as it relates to maybe the connection to other people or understanding other people or anything else?
Well, my mother is a social worker, and she very much spent time teaching us to find, the good in ourselves, to make sure that you are satisfied with the person looking at you or looking at in the mirror. That is very important. Yeah. That way you can be better for the world. And those lessons I always knew, and I always did them in practice. However, there were still things that I would do to people, things that I would say. My words, words can be very powerful. She would say, sticks and stones may break my bones, but words can forever hurt me. And I found that I was using my wit or ability to be funny to hurt people. And, on a particularly heavy mushroom session, I thought about something I'd said up to someone when I was in third grade. And, I was sitting there 28 years old thinking, why would I say that to someone 20 years ago? And it's always been, psychedelics has really acted as a mirror to see how I am to other people, not how I think I am, but how someone may perceive me, and how powerful and cutting words can be. And so I had to make sure that I use that power for good instead of just to say, oh, your face. I don't know. I don't know what I would say. I just always had a knack for picking out something that I could tell someone was hiding. And that's not something people want brought up. But I'm so curious that I can see it all over their face. And I'd be like, so let's talk about this thing that I know you hate about yourself. And I just never thought that how that would affect other people, how other people take that in. Because I'm always ready to talk about things.
Yeah, until mushrooms put it in the mirror and showed you and said, this is how it's affecting other people.
Right, which is very important for all of us to know how we are to the people around us and how we make them feel, and to be aware. It's just super important.
Yeah, because a lot of people report back with mushrooms that they feel a new or a strengthened connection to other people and to nature. Do you think that was at all part of this experience for you?
Mine was more. I describe it as, well, but before I get into that, the first time that I ever really tripped on mushrooms was a little less than 8 years ago. And, I'd been trying psychedelics for about 13 years and seeing, but I took
Right.
a heroic dose about 8 years ago. And that is when I truly had my transformative experience with mushrooms instead of LSD being what would usually make me feel so connected. So within that, I forgot where I was going. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no. So this heroic dose was transformative. Do you want to share kind of a little bit about that journey and what the experience was? I mean, the point of this podcast is not to do a bunch of trip reports, but
No,
I think it's always helpful to kind of hear, somebody's experience, especially, somebody's talking about a heroic dose of mushrooms. There may have been something that occurred during that trip that ended up being pretty impactful.
Right.
So I don't know, maybe if that's where you were going.
It was. It was. It was talking about once I took that heroic dose, it felt as though it's almost like your brain is able to have a glimpse of what it must feel like to know how big the universe is. It's knowing that I don't know. I most likely will never know, but I had a glimpse of that weight of knowledge. And it reminded me that, again, we are just monkeys with clothes on, and that we're, being on Earth, it is a much smaller thing than we think. The borders that we've made, the amount of people that are on Earth is such a small number in comparison to how big things really are. The third smallest planet next to a star that is so insignificant in the universe, we are right next to each other. We are on top of each other. And, the things that we have done to make arbitrary lines and to separate ourselves, it seemed very foolish to me. And it made regular life so absurd. I always describe driving my car the next day as feeling very silly that I'm operating this giant machine with my fingers. And that connection is what I realized that is what I needed to remind myself of, that I am just a silly, kind of insignificant thing. And for some people that would depress them, but for me that makes me feel great because I have an effect on my immediate surroundings, which is what I have to live in. So that those are the things I should be concerned about, the people right next to me. Because,
And how do you maintain that? I mean, that's a pretty good lesson. How do you not let that just kind of fade away? How have you kept that lesson of knowing how small we are and how important your little sphere is within all this? How do you keep that in your mind and as part of your life?
Well, I always a sentence that always comes back to me, most heavily on a mushroom dose would be the sentence, "The work is every day." So I remember I wrote it down in highlighter, whilst on truffles one day in Amsterdam, and I just kept writing, "The work is every day." So I do my best to keep that. So I actually quit my job. I was working in a bookstore. I left my job and I started working with children. I figured that I could understand why my family members do it. A lot of my family members work in the school system. And so I did that as well because I remember when, being a child and having that one adult that said, you don't have to be a piece of shit. And that, she of course didn't say it like that, but she was letting me know that you're a smart kid and sometimes you do and say things that are counterproductive. So, make sure you work on that because you have to realize that you can have a profound effect on other people. And so I was trying to do my best to think how I could, make my life revolve around that. The idea that if what you're doing isn't helping, then what are you doing? So I started working with children, and I've been doing that for a really long time. However, trying to be a psychedelic advocate is difficult when, I could obviously not be allowed to work with children anymore if people were aware of that. So I just try to make myself into a positive example of what, the positive example of what people would not think a quote-unquote druggie would look like. Yes, I do psychedelics and whatnot, and I smoke pot, but I also, read up to 15 books a year. I'm also a nice person. I also volunteer. I learned that lesson from a speaker at a psychedelic conference, that she tried to make her life look like such an amazing picture that someone would say, how do you do it? And that's how you segue into saying, well, I took 4 grams of mushrooms, and the death of my ego really helped, and maybe it could benefit you.
Yeah. And so you, on one hand, you have to be careful because of your current profession. But on the other hand, you describe yourself as an advocate, and you want to do like you say, and get psychedelics out of the closet and start conversations. So how do you balance those two?
I would not say with great difficulty, because I think I do a very good job of letting the people around me know that I am a nice person. I do nice things. I go out of my way. I genuinely enjoy children, and I have a very pleasant disposition. I think someone would be hard-pressed to compare my disposition with theirs if they were so anti-psychedelics. Because a lot of people have... There's a weight to dealing with children, a heavy weight, the emotional toll that it can take on you. When you hear children's stories, it could be... You could make you very cynical. And working for a school system, it can make you very cynical. And so I try to do my best to be that person that reminds people of why we're doing it, why it's so important, and the service that you do working with children. And so I feel as though talking about the fact that I do, or I have done psychedelics, I feel as though I'm doing my best to be a quote-unquote non-threatening representation of that. So it's more palatable to people that would normally think that it was, the scourge of the earth, or killing people, or a lot of the propaganda that they would hear about drug users. Yeah,
a lot of misconceptions out there, and it creates a lot of stigma, around these medicines. And so, how are you, the advocacy part of it? How are you advocating? What do you do? Do you talk to? Your friends growing up, they were right there with you. What about parents and parents' friends and any other community you're a part of? How are you able to talk about these things and do your advocacy?
That's actually difficult. And even in my 30s, I'm the youngest of 3. My family works in the school system, but I have a family member that was incarcerated for marijuana, for cannabis, actually. And that was a big catalyst for me. And it also, the stigma is that if you're black, as I am, if you're a black American, we don't use psychedelics. That is something for white hippies. That's not, what I'm saying? Like, we don't do that.
So why is that? Why? I understand why the white hippies do it. What is it about the black community that says no to psychedelics?
Well,
I'm just curious, because I'll go to all these conferences. Not all of them, but I've been to a couple big conferences on plant medicine, psychedelics. I look around the room, and it's not like I'm doing some kind of a survey, but I'm like, there's not a lot of people of color sitting in this room.
Oh, no.
And I always wonder why that is.
I'm actually, in school right now, and I'm most likely going to write my thesis about something like this, because I noticed it as well. I've been going to conferences since 2012, I did notice that I am most times the only black person, not necessarily person of color, because you will get an abundance of Latinos, or maybe some indigenous people will also come because of the relationship that their community, may have with psychedelics versus my general community. Sometimes I think because, with not starting with the crack epidemic, but as an example, the crack epidemic in the 80s, the penalty of course, for crack was 100 times more harsh than the penalty for having cocaine. And so there are certain things that are racial. And most likely, most of the black people that I know, actually I know this, most of the black people I know have never done a psychedelic with another black person. I don't even know any other black female psychedelics out there. I do know of some that exist via the internet. And of course, Monica Williams up at UConn, my alma mater, was trying to do some amazing work, but of course, things get shut down. But it's just so rare for me to meet any other African Americans specifically that are willing to, because of the misconceptions, predominantly being that my family's Southern, it's just Christian. That's what you get. So, things like that have been seen as, yes?
Is there a that deep-rooted Christianness with the African Americans? Is there a view of psychedelics as being against Christianity, of the devil, or something where maybe it's built into the religion that they look at this and say that's not something we should be touching because of religion? Because on the other hand, I understand as an African American, you don't ever want to be carrying something illegal around because you're going to get severely punished for that.
Yeah.
So
and the mandatory
practical
minimums
sense.
are crazy. Yeah, it definitely is practical.
Yeah, and I can see the fear coming out of the whole crack versus cocaine. I can see that reverberating. But if you look at the other side, at the religion, because a friend of mine who's an African American, she's not a psychonaut at all, has never done any of this. And I asked her, I said, why don't I see any black people at these events? And she said the religion. She's not real religious, but she mentioned the religion also. So I wonder, what your thoughts are on that. Now that you said you're from the South and have grown up with that. What are your thoughts on that?
Actually, my parents are from the South, so I'm first generation North. But I'm from the Northeast, from a predominantly white place.
Right.
So the scrutiny was almost, it was more cultural than religious, in terms of, not seeing any other African Americans talk about psychedelics or partake, but even when it comes to media, movies, I've been doing content analysis, trying to ascertain whether the race of how psychedelic users are portrayed, whether that has any effect on the attitudes of black people in America. And I'm finding it's very difficult to find any media that has had African Americans in that space, even being the hippie, even being the guy with the long hair and the yoga, no, it's still never a black dude. It's just not something that goes on. So sometimes, a lot of people, you do what you see as well, and it's just not seen as much, except from the movie Hair. The movie Hair does have black people that Alex. But besides that, it's not something that's seen as a thing black people do.
That's interesting.
And it's also, it's just looked at as a quote unquote white drug. The same way that
it sure is. I mean, it factually is a white drug.
Yeah, and so I felt, or I saw the kind of hole in that, and I realized that in terms of dealing with mental illness and things, in dealing with depression and PTSD, the percentage of Black Americans with PTSD is high. It's like 8.5%, versus I think Latinos, it's like 5%. And so it's a big market difference in things like PTSD that is dealing with racial trauma. Like, I have been traumatized by the police before, from a young age. And that is something that people don't realize is a constant thing that you deal with, because even if you've never seen, police brutality as a thing, it's still something It's still something that you have to be aware of. And if the police are everywhere, or if the people that you're told your whole life are going to, subjugate you and put you down, you build an apathy towards the system as well. So it's so difficult to get out of that, to get out of your own head, and to deal with the racial aspects of everyday life and that trauma as well. That it can be a very heavy thing to deal with psychedelics, in that, to confront those things as well, because it can make you see enemies everywhere, or it can give you peace. But either way, you're going to have to work through that until you break through to that other side. And for some people, you take it once. For some people, you have to take it a lot and have, of course, therapy and whatnot. Therapy is amazing for everyone. Everyone should do that if you need it.
Yes.
But, there's just a lot to confront. And I think a lot of people just don't want to do that because they are tired and it is hard enough.
Yeah.
It's just a mental game.
Yeah, it's hard enough, but hopefully, I don't know, that's a really good point. Obviously, the horrors that go on in our country, but I never really thought about the reverberations of trauma and PTSD as a result of that, and the effect that must be having, because people self-medicate. When we deal with trauma, whatever the trauma was, human beings, we self-medicate, and a lot of times self-medication can cause problems.
Right.
And just make the whole thing worse. And so that's something that's an aspect of this I hadn't considered.
That's cool.
Yeah,
that your mind is open enough to consider that position as well.
Yeah, I don't. Maybe it's. I'm sure it's the medicines that help crack me open.
Well, I think that these are things that I never would have considered had I not, had those experiences. It changed my perception and my perspective. I always tell people, you can look at the same thing every day, and you take mushrooms, and all of a sudden you're like, wow, my hands. All the bones are where they're supposed to be. I call it the 2 inches. I always think if my heart was 2 inches forward or backwards or left or right, I may not even be alive. And so the fact that I'm even in this meat vehicle and everything's where it's supposed to be to get me to this age of 34 is incredible. And so those are the things that I try to integrate. That the general sentence, don't forget to be in awe. Because if you let those things that traumatize you, re-traumatize you daily, that's very heavy. So the way that you can work through that, especially through these entheogens and medicines and therapy, is to realize that life is also beautiful. As painful as it is, the lights are still on. You're still there. You're still out here in a world. You still have fingers and toes, and even if you don't, you still have things to appreciate. And those are the things that I do my best to hold on to, or else things can, of course, get dark for anyone.
Yeah. Yeah, and then our connections to these other beautiful souls, these other beautiful people out there.
Right.
Doing the same thing.
And it's so important,
amazing.
We're such a social creature that it's very important to do our best to connect with other people. That's something I definitely still need to work on. But I try to do my best.
You got more opportunities.
Right, and just to make people aware that they are amazing as well. I think that we can be so focused on work and punching numbers and doing what we have to do that don't forget, you were a championship wrestler in high school, or you know what I mean? Like, you have had things that you are good at, and to not let all of these other things bog you down, to enjoy things, to, again, be in awe. It's super important. And I think through LSD and mushrooms, those are the things that they fundamentally taught me that I try to impart onto other people. And I'm not saying that everyone needs to do psychedelics. My girlfriend is a very connected person, and she's very sensitive to things. And what's interesting is that on mushrooms, I recognize her need not to do them. It almost puts me on a similar plane, because I can understand living in a world as an emotive person that is sensitive to those things. And that is important for me to connect to even the person that I love. So it has opened a lot of doors.
Wonderful. Wonderful.
Yeah,
I love that. So it's don't forget to be in awe.
Yes,
is that what it
say
is?
it all the time. And
Don't
the work is every day.
I love it. Yeah, I love that. That's awesome, Jasmin. So what else? Do you have anything else you want to share with us?
No, I mean, honestly, I don't know what I'm trying to do. I listened to a speech by Graham Hancock one day that really changed my life, and also dealing with a family member in the criminal justice system, and what a heavy blanket that is over you. And it made me realize that that we are traumatizing people for no reason. And so if there's anything that I can do as an advocate, as someone that's getting this degree, because I feel like the more paperwork you get, the more people will listen to you. I want to, scream from the rooftops that you are in pain. A lot of us are in pain, and there are other reasons why, and there are things that are so good in our lives that we have to stick to, or to hold on to. So I'm doing my best to study so that I can be a vocal advocate and hopefully legalize these medicines in conjunction with, therapy, and really just get people out of the muck to realize how amazing they are. So that's just the only thing I want people to know. That is what I would want recorded until the end of time.
Nice. Well, that is beautiful, and I wish you all the success in the world to get out there and help all of us and do good things and advocate.
Thanks, man.
Yeah, well, thank you, Jasmin. I really appreciate you being here on the show, and I just wish you all the best in life.
My pleasure.
Yeah, well, that's it. That's good stuff, Jasmin. I really I'm grateful for you and what you're doing and the insights you have and kind of a unique position you have. So I look forward to seeing the great things you do out there and helping people.
Thanks, ditto. I look forward to continuing to listen to your podcast.
That concludes this edition of the Stoned Ape Reports. Thank you for listening. Please follow us on Instagram at Stoned Ape Comedy and subscribe to our newsletter at www.stonedapecomedy.com. Again, thanks for listening, and catch you next time, Stoned Apes.